professor is an associate professor of English and also an associate chair, and she's talking about creative thinking.
Okay, so do you recognize this guy here? Okay, so the funny thing about talking about creative thinking, and I've done this a lot and with a lot of different venues and a lot of sort of different audiences, is that usually when I say the word creative, everybody stops listening and they don't hear the word thinking. So they think I'm just talking about creative and they don't actually see that there's this sort of thinking part of it. And that's kind of funny to me because I have a lot to say about it, and yet I know that there's this thing that's going on when I'm saying creative. And part of what I think happens is, oops, how do I move this? Is people get this sort of image of creative, oh, it must be some sort of great artistic masterpiece, and she's talking about creative, so that must be what it is, and I'm not great and I'm not artistic, so I can't really go any further than that. Or they may say, being creative is somebody creating a wonderful artistic masterpiece. And again, that's not me, so this really doesn't apply to me, so I'm just not going to even think about it anymore. This is what I have to call, oops, brain freeze. Right, so I'm talking about creative thinking. I'm supposed to stand right here. I'm talking about creative thinking, and yet everybody just hears creative and they stop. So could you all please join me right now in saying the phrase together, creative thinking. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Creative thinking. Yes, okay. All right, so I think we're all on the same page. I want to talk very briefly about creative thinking and sort of higher education, because we are in an institution of higher education. And the US is actually late in joining the conversation on creative thinking and its use in education. Countries like Japan, Great Britain, even Portugal, Australia, and India have been thinking about creative thinking in terms of higher education for a really long time. We've only really done so, say, in the last 10 years. Richard Florida's The Rise of the Creative Class and Daniel Pink's A Whole New Mind sort of acted as clarion calls for higher education in the US to sort of start paying attention to the values of creative thinking, the benefits of creative thinking, and the importance of creative thinking. A lot of work on creative thinking takes place across the disciplines. So it doesn't just take place in the arts. People from economics, the health sciences, engineering, oh my goodness, cognitive science, sociology, they're all thinking about creative thinking, and they're all thinking about what is it, who has it, how and why does it develop, and all that good kind of stuff. Okay, do you know who that is? Just kidding. That's somebody looking for a needle in a haystack. And that is supposed to be representative of what Albert Einstein, who was one of our greatest creative thinkers, had to say about creative thinking. And he was once asked what the difference was between he and the average person. And he said that if you asked the average person to find a needle in the haystack, the person would stop when he or she found a needle. He, on the other hand, would tear through the entire haystack, looking for all of the possible needles that might actually be embedded in the haystack. And he wasn't going to be satisfied until he figured out if there was more than one needle in that haystack. And he didn't think that was a waste of time. And that's kind of what it is like with creative thinking. One searches for as many possible needles or ideas or alternative approaches as possible, whether one is working in the field of science or the field of the arts or perhaps sociology or history or economics, any of these fields. And that's what creative thinking sort of is. All right, a more formal definition of creative thinking, which actually is posted here on our own website under our essential learning outcomes, thank you, is that creative thinking is both the capacity to combine or synthesize existing ideas, images, or expertise in original ways, and the experience of thinking, reacting, and working in an imaginative way, characterized by a high degree of innovation, divergent thinking, and we're going to be doing some practice in divergent thinking, and risk-taking. And risk-taking is pretty huge, and most people don't naturally take to risk-taking. They're like, oh no, I want to do things the same way that I know that I would normally do things. Okay, so I'm going to just sort of very quickly, I'm going to make this available to you guys, but just very quickly, it talks about the difference between kind of creativity that a young child may sort of experience, where kids don't really know boundaries, and the creativity somebody who's in higher education may experience. So you know what the boundaries are, you know what you can do within your discipline, and you know what's not acceptable. And that's fine, but you need to push past those boundaries, is what people who study creative thinking say. You need to recognize what they are, and then just need to break them without fear of consequences. Okay, what's that? Oh, really? Okay, well, we'll see. All right. There's a man called Michael Michalko. Any of you here have ever heard of him? Yes, Lindsay. Okay, so he was an officer in the US military, and he was asked to organize a team of NATO intelligence experts and academics in order to categorize fairly systematically all the different kinds of creative thinking, known creative thinking, that they possibly could. So they drew on a lot of different research. Their goal was to apply what they knew to the military. Oh, they weren't asking us to be painters. Military, to the political situations, and also to social problems. Has nothing to do with the arts, nothing to do with music, nothing to do with writing, but everything to do with the world as it exists. He's also worked with the CIA, their think tanks, and he's also worked with a lot of corporations in producing creative thinking workshops. Okay, I'm going to just talk a little bit about Michalko's work here. One of the questions that he asked is, what do these two things have in common? So we have the Mona Lisa, and we have Einstein's theory of relativity. His team looked at notebooks and correspondence and ideas and conversations and everything they possibly could to figure out, these are so different, and yet both these thinkers thought things that nobody else had thought, or both these thinkers produced things that nobody else had produced. So what did they actually have in common? All right, well, one of the big things they have in common was that they were, like Einstein, looking for those needles in the haystack. They thought of as many possible possibilities as possible. They thought about as many approaches as they possibly could, and they were not afraid to fail. They really were not afraid to fail. That was not something that even entered their mind. They had made a lot of mistakes along the way, but they didn't see those mistakes as failure. They saw those actually as opportunities for something additional. Alrighty, let's see. Where am I? Okay. So one of the things that we want to think about when we're thinking about creative thinking in higher education is that education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And I want to provide us with a little mini exercise here in terms of how can we train our minds to sort of think more creatively. You ready for this? You ready to take a risk? Is your stomach churning? Okay. Okay, so this is a nice little creative thinking exercise that was developed by J.P. Guilford. It was actually in 1967, way before we started thinking about creative thinking in relation to higher education. And it asks you to stretch your creativity by giving you 2 minutes, so we're going to have 2 minutes to complete this exercise, to think of as many uses as possible for an everyday object, like a chair, or a coffee mug, or a brick, or a paper clip, so that's why the paper clip was in there. Here are some examples. So first one holds papers together. That's like the most obvious one, and that's probably the one we're going to come together with first. But if you were a 3-year-old child and you saw a paperclip, you probably wouldn't think, oh, holds papers together. You'd be like, what can I stick this in? Cufflinks, earrings. I love imitation mini trombone. That is just so clever to me. Things you use to push the emergency restart button on your router. That's brilliant. Keeping headphones from getting tangled up, or a bookmark. Okay, so those are some examples. The test measures divergent thinking across 4 categories. So fluency, how many uses can you come up with? And the test says, take 2 minutes. Well, you know, you're a risk taker, you're a rule breaker, you can take more than 2 minutes if you want to. Originality, how common are these uses? So if it holds papers together, that's not very original. If it's router restarter, that's a little bit more original. Flexibility, how many areas your answers cover? So 2 examples, cufflinks and earrings. I'm never going to put paper clips in my ears because that just sounds painful, but they're both accessories. And then elaboration, level of detail and responses. So all of those are sort of considered higher scores, but no one is scoring you. You're just scoring yourself. You're just thinking, how can I push myself further? How can I challenge myself to do this? All right, so is everybody ready? You sure? Okay, you ready? Try it. How many uses can you think of for a spoon? 2 minutes, go. Okay, I think that's roughly 2 minutes. I may be cheating a little bit. All right, so no one is going to judge you on this. This is just a sort of exercise that you can continue to do by yourself any time of the day or evening, but not too late at night, otherwise you might not sleep. So dig into your backpack or dig into your pocketbook or look in your bedside table, pull something up and start thinking about, gee, how many uses can I make of this particular object? So the next time you hear the phrase creative thinking, don't succumb to brain freeze. Instead, please think about spoons. Thank you.